Dr. Lyra Patel had always known her quantum harmonization experiments were dangerous, but she hadn't expected them to tear a hole in reality itself. The laboratory hummed with an otherworldly resonance as the quantum harmonic oscillator spun faster than it was ever designed to, its crystalline core glowing with an impossible light. "Computer emergency shutdown," she shouted, fingers flying across multiple haptic interfaces. The machine's pitch grew higher, more insistent. Warning lights bathed the underground facility in crimson as the quantum harmonics reached critical frequency. Unable to comply, the AI responded with infuriating calm. "Unknown energy signature detected. Conventional shutdown protocols ineffective." Lyra grabbed the manual override lever, but before she could pull it, the air itself seemed to crystallize. The quantum harmonizer's light became blindingly intense and reality split. When her vision cleared, she found herself facing two beings that defied conventional description. The first appeared as a woman with skin that rippled like the surface of a black hole, stars seemingly swimming beneath her epidermis. The second took the form of a tall, angular figure whose body seemed to be composed of geometric patterns that shifted and reconfigured themselves constantly. "Greetings, Dr. Lyra Patel," the star-skinned woman said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Lyra's teeth vibrate. "I am Nyx and this is Thuron. We are your assigned life optimization specialists." Thuron's geometric form rearranged itself into something approximating a bow. When he spoke, his voice sounded like crystalline wind chimes. "Your quantum harmonization experiment has qualified you for our services. Congratulations on achieving a Class 7 reality deviation." Lyra backed away slowly, her hand reaching for the emergency beacon on her wrist. What are you?" "We are interdimensional facilitators," Nyx explained, moving with liquid grace as she examined the still-smoking quantum harmonizer. "Your experiment created a temporary breach in the walls between realities, activating Protocol 2247B, assignment of optimization specialists to beings of emerging dimensional awareness." "In simpler terms," Thuron added, his patterns shifting to something more relaxed, "we're here to help you navigate the complexities of multidimensional existence. Think of us as cosmic personal assistants." Lyra's scientific mind raced to process what she was seeing. "You're saying my experiment didn't fail, it actually worked, but instead of just proving quantum consciousness, it summoned you." "Summoned is an imprecise term," Nyx corrected. "We were always here in a manner of speaking. Your experiment simply allowed you to perceive us and triggered our assignment protocols." The laboratory's emergency lights were still flashing, but now they seemed to pass through Nyx and Thuron, creating prismatic effects that hurt Lyra's eyes to look at directly. She reached for her tablet, instinctively wanting to document everything. "I must advise against recording this interaction," Thuron said, his geometric form flowing into a more serious configuration. "It violates Section 89C of the Interdimensional Information Protection Act." "There are laws about this," Lyra asked incredulously. "There are laws about everything," Nyx replied with what might have been amusement. "Reality is far more regulated than most beings imagine, which is precisely why beings like you need beings like us." Lyra sank into her lab chair, trying to process the implications. "So, what exactly does life optimization entail?" "Everything from temporal management to probability adjustment," Thuron explained. "For instance, in approximately 3 minutes, your department head Dr. Harrison will arrive to investigate the energy spike from your experiment. Without our intervention, this would lead to the termination of your research funding. However," Nyx continued, raising a star-speckled hand, "we can implement a small probability shift that will result in him being temporarily delayed by a malfunctioning elevator, giving us time to optimize the situation." As if on cue, Lyra's tablet chimed with a message from Dr. Harrison: "Stuck in elevator. Meeting delayed 30 minutes. Send security." "That's convenient," Lyra managed, suddenly understanding that her life was about to become significantly more complicated. "But why me, why now?" "Your work on quantum consciousness and harmonic resonance patterns has brought you to the attention of the Interdimensional Oversight Committee," Nyx explained. "You're on the verge of discoveries that could fundamentally alter your reality's relationship with the multiverse. Which means you require guidance," Thuron added. "Left unchecked, such discoveries have a 73.4% chance of causing catastrophic dimensional instability." "And with guidance?" Lyra asked, already suspecting the answer. That depends entirely on how well you follow our optimization protocols. Nix replied with a smile that somehow contained galaxies. Shall we begin with your first lesson in multidimensional probability management? Before Lyra could respond, her quantum harmonizer began to pulse with new energy, its crystalline core resonating with Nix and Thuron's presence. The air shimmered with possibility, and Lyra realized she was standing at the threshold of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. Welcome, Thuron said, his geometric patterns forming what might have been a smile, to your optimized existence. 1 week after the arrival of her interdimensional life optimization specialists, Dr. Lyra Patel was beginning to question her sanity. Her laboratory, once a sanctuary of pure scientific inquiry, had become ground zero for what could only be described as controlled chaos. Please explain again why there are 3 versions of me trying to use the electron microscope, Lyra asked, watching her temporal duplicates argue over proper calibration settings. Nix, who was currently floating cross-legged near the ceiling, her star-flecked skin illuminating the room with a soft cosmic glow, smiled serenely. Temporal optimization. By allowing multiple timeline variants of yourself to work simultaneously, we've increased your research efficiency by 278%. Though the paperwork was absolutely nightmarish, Thuron added, his geometric form currently arranged into something resembling a filing cabinet. Form 394T for each temporal duplicate, plus insurance riders for potential paradox damage. A fourth Lyra suddenly materialized beside the electron microscope, causing the other 3 to groan in unison. Late again, they chorused. This is getting out of hand, the original Lyra muttered, pinching the bridge of her nose. How do we even know which one is the original me anymore? That's a rather limited 3-dimensional perspective, Nix observed. In a quantum state, originality is merely a consensual illusion. Speaking of illusions, Thuron chimed in, his patterns rearranging into an alert configuration, we have an incoming variance. Dr. Harrison is about to make an unscheduled inspection, and he's bringing the grant committee. The multiple Lyras froze in unified panic. What? The committee isn't supposed to visit for another month. Someone adjusted the probability matrix, Nix explained, descending from the ceiling with fluid grace. I suspect Dr. Rivera in applied physics. She's been attempting to redirect funding to her own projects. Can't you just delay them like last time? Lyra asked desperately, watching her duplicates scramble to appear less obviously paradoxical. Multiple uses of the same probability adjustment within a limited timeframe require Form 87C with triple authentication, Thuron explained. The paperwork wouldn't clear for at least 6 hours. However, Nix interjected, her star-like eyes twinkling. There is a subsection in the regulations regarding emergency dimensional compression in cases of imminent bureaucratic interference. Thuron's patterns shifted skeptically. You're not suggesting Protocol X-19. What's Protocol X-19? All 4 Lyras asked simultaneously. A temporary folding of local spacetime, Nix explained, already raising her hands to begin the procedure. It will allow us to compress approximately 6 hours of work into the next 5 minutes. Technically legal if we file it under emergency quantum state preservation. The amount of forms we'll have to fill out, Thuron began, would be less than dealing with an unauthorized temporal duplicate exposure, Nix countered. Lyra, all of you prepare for temporal compression. Before any of the Lyras could protest, reality seemed to fold in on itself. The laboratory became a blur of motion as all 4 versions of herself worked at impossible speeds, their movements leaving trailing afterimages in the air. Equipment was calibrated, data was recorded, and experiments were completed in what felt like seconds but somehow also hours. When reality snapped back to normal speed, Lyra found herself alone again. Her temporal duplicates had been seamlessly reintegrated. Standing before a perfectly organized laboratory with complete experimental results displayed on every screen. Just in time for Dr. Harrison to open the door, leading a group of serious-looking committee members. Dr. Patel, Harrison beamed, I hope we're not interrupting anything. Not at all, Lyra managed, still slightly dizzy from the temporal compression. I was just completing today's trials on quantum harmonic resonance patterns. Excellent timing, said one of the committee members studying a readout. These results are remarkably comprehensive. As the committee moved through the laboratory, examining her work with increasing enthusiasm, Lyra noticed Nyx and Thuron had transformed themselves to appear as ordinary lab equipment, though she could have sworn the centrifuge winked at her. Dr. Patel, Harrison announced after the tour, the committee is extremely impressed with your progress. We're prepared to double your funding effective immediately. After the committee left, Lyra slumped against her desk. That was too close. Actually, Thuron said, shifting back to his normal form, it was precisely as close as regulations allowed. Any closer would have required Form 92D, violation of bureaucratic proximity protocols. But now we have a bigger problem, Nyx announced, reforming from what had appeared to be a particularly shiny spectrometer. The temporal compression has created some side effects. Lyra looked up to see small objects around the laboratory beginning to float. Through the window, she could see cars in the parking lot slowly rising off the ground. Please tell me there's a form for this, she said weakly. Oh, there are several, Thuron assured her, his patterns already reconfiguring into a cascade of paperwork. The question is, which dimension should we file them in? Outside, gravity continued to take an unscheduled holiday as Lyra realized that in the world of interdimensional bureaucracy, success often created more problems than failure. And somewhere in the building, Dr. Rivera was about to discover that her own laboratory had accidentally been transformed into a pocket universe filled with nothing but recursive equations. Dr. Lyra Patel knew something was wrong the moment she entered her laboratory. The air felt thick, like honey, and her quantum harmonizer was emitting a low-frequency hum she'd never heard before. Most worryingly, neither Nyx nor Thuron were anywhere to be seen. Authorization override Patel Lambda 7, she called out to her lab's AI. Full spectrum analysis. Warning, the AI responded immediately. Detection of multiple unauthorized quantum signatures, similar to previous interdimensional events but corrupted. A holographic display materialized, showing energy patterns that made Lyra's heart skip. Someone was attempting to replicate her experiment, but without the proper containment protocols. Before she could process this information, reality rippled and Nyx burst through what appeared to be a tear in the air itself. We have a Class 4 reality breach, Nyx announced, her usually sleek star-filled skin now turbulent with swirling nebulae. Dr. Rivera didn't just steal your research data, she's attempting to force open a dimensional portal. Where's Thuron? Lyra asked, already moving to her workstation to begin emergency protocols. Filing emergency paperwork in 6 dimensions simultaneously, Nyx replied. The bureaucracy is in chaos. Rivera's actions have violated at least 47 interdimensional regulations. The laboratory's lights flickered as another reality wave pulsed through the building. Through the windows, Lyra could see the sky turning colors that shouldn't exist. How bad is it? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. On a scale of 1 to total dimensional collapse, Nyx's star-like eyes pulsed with concern. We're approaching an 8. Rivera's attempt to replicate your quantum harmonization is creating unstable bridges between realities, without proper optimization protocols. She was interrupted by Thuron's sudden appearance, his geometric form vibrating with distress. Request for emergency intervention denied. The committee is claiming this falls under Section 89D. Self-inflicted reality distortions must self-resolve. That's ridiculous, Lyra protested. The whole dimension could collapse. Technically, Thuron's patterns shifted into what Lyra had learned was his quoting regulations configuration. They're claiming that since Rivera's actions were inspired by your research, this counts as an extension of your original reality deviation. Another pulse rocked the building. Through the walls, they could hear screaming as people noticed that their shadows had begun moving independently. We don't have time for bureaucratic debates, Nyx declared. Lyra, we need to contain this breach before it destabilizes the entire probability matrix. But without committee approval, Thuron began. There's a loophole, Lyra interrupted, surprising both interdimensional beings. I've been studying your regulations. Under Protocol 23B, assigned optimization specialists can take emergency action if their primary client's research is being compromised by unauthorized duplication. Nyx's stellar skin brightened with approval. She's right. Rivera's experiment technically counts as intellectual property theft across dimensional boundaries. Which would require, Thuron's form rippled with sudden understanding. Form 394C, all three said simultaneously. I already filed it, Lyra admitted, pulling up a holographic document. Been carrying it around since Rivera first started asking too many questions about my research. You filed interdimensional paperwork without our knowledge. Thuron's patterns expressed both shock and what might have been pride. I learned from the best, Lyra smiled. Now are we going to save reality or not? The next few moments were a blur of action. Nyx transformed into a living conduit of cosmic energy, channeling the dimensional disruptions away from populated areas. Thuron's geometric form expanded to create a containment field around Rivera's laboratory, his patterns spinning complex equations that stabilized local spacetime. Lyra worked at her own quantum harmonizer, modifying it to counter Rivera's corrupted frequencies. Through the chaos, she could see her rival researcher through a window, surrounded by crackling energy as her unauthorized experiment spiraled out of control. Rivera, Lyra shouted through the quantum field. Shut it down, you don't understand what you're dealing with. I understand perfectly, Rivera called back, her lab coat smoking slightly. Do you know what your little optimization specialists really are? They're interdimensional prison guards keeping us locked in our limited reality. Actually, Thuron's voice echoed through the quantum field. We're more like regulatory compliance officers with optional reality manipulation privileges. Not helping Thuron, Nyx shouted, her form stretching between multiple points in space as she contained another dimensional rupture. Rivera's machine began to pulse with increasing intensity. We deserve access to the higher dimensions. No more bureaucrats, no more regulations, no more. She never finished her sentence. Her unauthorized quantum harmonizer reached critical resonance, creating a feedback loop that caused it to implode. Reality seemed to hold its breath for a moment, then snapped back like a cosmic rubber band. When the quantum dust settled, Rivera's laboratory was gone, replaced by what appeared to be a small pocket dimension filled with endless filing cabinets. Well, Nyx observed, reforming into her usual appearance, that's one way to achieve interdimensional access. Is she? Lyra began, concerned despite everything. Oh, she's fine, Thuron assured her, his patterns returning to normal. She's just been automatically redirected to the interdimensional filing department, standard procedure for unauthorized reality tampering. She'll be cataloging temporal variance reports for the next few centuries. A fitting punishment, Nyx agreed, though the paperwork to process her dimensional reassignment will be astronomical. Lyra looked around her laboratory, now bearing scars from multiple reality breaches. What happens now? Now Thuron's form shifted to display a cascade of new documents. Now we file the incident reports, in triplicate, across 7 dimensions. But first, Nyx added with a stellar twinkle in her eye, I believe this qualifies you for an upgrade in your optimization services. How do you feel about probability manipulation privileges? Lyra thought about the chaos they'd just survived, the regulations they'd navigated, and the strange new world she now inhabited. Will there be paperwork? There's always paperwork, both interdimensional beings replied in unison. Outside, reality settled back into its proper shape, though some shadows continued to dance when they thought no one was looking. And in a pocket dimension filled with endless filing cabinets, Dr. Rivera began her first lesson in proper interdimensional documentation procedures. I still think this is a terrible idea, Thuron declared, his geometric patterns cycling through worried configurations as Lyra adjusted her modified quantum harmonizer. Noted and filed under Form 47B, protests of concerned optimization specialists, Lyra replied without looking up. 3 months of dealing with interdimensional bureaucracy had taught her the value of proper documentation. Nyx, who was currently examining the cascading equations floating in the air around them, allowed a small supernova to bloom across her skin. She's right, Thuron. Rivera's breach created instabilities that are still propagating through the dimensional barriers, if we don't act soon. The entire probability matrix could unravel, Lyra finished, making a final adjustment. I've been tracking the deterioration patterns. We have maybe 48 hours before reality starts experiencing critical failures. But attempting to traverse multiple unstable dimensions, Thuron began, is precisely what we're authorized to do, Lyra interrupted, pulling up a holographic document. Under Emergency Protocol X-42, Prevention of Cascading Reality Failures by Authorized Personnel. When did you file that? Thuron asked, his patterns expressing surprise. She didn't, Nyx said with something like pride. I did last week. Probability calculations suggested we'd need it. The laboratory had been transformed into what Lyra called their dimensional command center. Holographic displays showed reality fractures spreading like cracks through multiple layers of existence. The quantum harmonizer, now modified with technology that probably violated several laws of physics, and definitely violated Section 23 of the Interdimensional Technology Regulations, hummed with potential energy. The plan is simple, Lyra explained, activating a series of complex equations. We use the harmonizer to navigate through the damaged dimensions, stabilizing the worst breaches before they can spread. Meanwhile, Thuron maintains our connection to baseline reality through his geometric manipulation abilities. And I provide the energy necessary to power the whole operation, Nyx added, her cosmic form already beginning to pulse with increased brightness, while simultaneously filing the requisite paperwork for emergency dimensional traversal. That's not a simple plan, Thuron protested. That's at least 4 Class 2 violations of already covered under subsection 7 of the emergency protocol, Lyra assured him. I've learned a few things about interdimensional regulations. Before Thuron could voice further objections, the quantum harmonizer began to pulse with increasing intensity. Reality around them started to thin, becoming transparent enough to see other dimensions bleeding through. Ready? Lyra asked, taking a deep breath. Ready, Nyx confirmed, her form expanding to encompass them in a protective field of stellar energy. Filing final protest under Form 62D, Thuron sighed, but his patterns shifted into travel configuration nonetheless. The quantum harmonizer reached critical frequency and reality dissolved. They found themselves floating in what Lyra could only describe as the space between spaces. Dimensions flowed past like sheets in the wind, each one containing a different version of reality. In one, she saw her laboratory where everything was made of living crystal. In another, the laws of physics appeared to work backward. First breach detected, Nyx announced, her voice echoing strangely through the dimensional void. 2 levels up, temporal coordinates shifting. Lyra adjusted the harmonizer's frequency, guiding them toward the disturbance. As they approached, she could see the damage Rivera's experiment had caused, a jagged tear in the fabric of reality itself, leaking raw probability into the surrounding dimensions. Thuron, we need a stabilization matrix, Lyra called out. The geometric being expanded his form, creating a complex lattice of mathematical patterns around the breach. Matrix established, but it's unstable. The probability leak is too severe. I can contain it, Nyx declared, her stellar form brightening. But you'll need to seal it quickly, Lyra, this much unfiltered dimensional energy. On it, Lyra said, already adjusting the harmonizer. She had learned more about quantum mechanics in the past 3 months than in her entire previous career, though she suspected some of what she now knew wasn't technically supposed to exist in her dimension. The harmonizer's beam connected with the breach, its frequencies matching then countering the chaotic energies. Slowly, the tier began to close, reality knitting itself back together under their combined efforts. 1 down, Lyra announced as they pulled back. How many more? 17 major breaches detected, Thuron reported, his patterns displaying the data. And the timeline is accelerating. We now have approximately 36 hours before total dimensional collapse. Then we better move faster, Lyra said, already adjusting their course through the dimensional void. Next breach. 3 levels down, probability coordinates shifting. But Lyra, Nyx's voice held a note of concern. The energy requirements for this are immense. I'm not sure how long I can maintain the protective field. We don't have a choice, Lyra replied, thinking of her own dimension of all dimensions unraveling into chaos. Whatever it takes, we have to fix this. They plunged deeper into the dimensional chaos, sealing breaches as they went. Each repair drained more energy from Nyx, caused more strain in Thuron's stabilization matrices. Lyra could feel the harmonizer growing dangerously hot in her hands, its components stressed beyond their design limits. But as they worked, she began to notice something else, a pattern in the chaos, a purpose in the probability fluctuations. The breaches weren't just random damage, they were forming a specific configuration across dimensions. Wait, she called out as they finished sealing the 12th breach. Something's wrong, these patterns, they're not random failures. What do you mean? Thuron asked, his patterns expressing confusion. Look at the distribution, Lyra said, projecting the data through the harmonizer. These breaches, they're creating a network almost like a bypass, Nyx finished, her stellar eyes widening with realization. Someone's trying to create a permanent connection between dimensions, a way around the regulatory barriers. Rivera, Lyra breathed. This wasn't an accident, she knew exactly what she was doing. Before they could process this revelation, a massive surge of energy rippled through the dimensional void. Reality itself seemed to scream as new breaches began opening faster than they could track them. Status report, Lyra shouted over the dimensional thunder. Multiple critical failures detecting across all surveyed levels, Thuron reported, his patterns barely maintaining coherence. The network is activating. We need to make a decision, Nyx said grimly, her protective field flickering under the strain. Right now. Around them, reality continued to tear itself apart, and Lyra realized they were running out of options and time. Time had stopped having meaning in the dimensional void. Reality fractured around them as Lyra, Nyx, and Thuron hovered at the center of interdimensional chaos, watching Rivera's network of breaches activate. Options, Lyra asked, her voice steady despite the situation. Calculating, Thuron replied, his geometric form processing countless probability streams. Standard containment protocols are insufficient. The network is self-sustaining now. Nyx's stellar form pulsed with effort as she maintained their protective field. We could attempt a full dimensional reset, but the paperwork alone would take. We don't have time for paperwork, Lyra interrupted, studying the energy patterns through her quantum harmonizer. Look at these readings. The network isn't just connecting dimensions, it's merging them. That's impossible, Thuron protested. The regulations specifically prohibit. The regulations assume everyone follows them, Lyra pointed out. Rivera found a way around them. She's using the natural resonance between dimensions to break down the barriers completely. Another surge of energy rocked the void. Through the chaos, they could see different versions of reality bleeding into each other. In one direction, a world of pure mathematics was colliding with a dimension of living sound. In another, time itself was folding into impossible shapes. Nyx, Lyra said suddenly, you said the energy requirements for maintaining dimensional separation were immense. What if that's the key? What if we stop fighting it? Explaining, Thuron demanded, his patterns expressing alarm. The regulations, the barriers, the whole bureaucratic system, it's all designed to keep dimensions separate, right? But what if that's not natural? What if dimensions want to interact? That's actually correct, Nyx admitted, her stellar eyes widening. The regulatory system was established to prevent chaos, but it requires constant energy to maintain the separations. So instead of trying to repair the breaches, Lyra continued, adjusting her harmonizer, we guide the integration, control the merger instead of fighting it. That would violate at least 300 major regulations, Thuron pointed out. File it under Form Omega, Reality Restructuring for Prevention of Total Dimensional Collapse, Lyra suggested. That form doesn't exist, Thuron said. It does now, Nyx countered, her cosmic form brightening with understanding. I just created it, in triplicate, across all affected dimensions. Another wave of dimensional energy washed over them. The void was filling with fragments of different realities, all seeking to connect, to integrate. If we do this, Thuron said, his patterns shifting uncertainly, everything changes. The barriers, the regulations, the entire system. I know, Lyra replied softly, but sometimes progress requires breaking a few interdimensional laws. Decision made, they began their work. Lyra modified her quantum harmonizer to amplify the natural resonances between dimensions instead of suppressing them. Nyx channeled her cosmic energy to guide the integration, ensuring compatible realities merged smoothly. Thuron, despite his reservations, used his geometric powers to create new mathematical frameworks that could support the emerging unified reality. The process was both beautiful and terrifying. They watched as barriers that had existed since the beginning of time dissolved. Knowledge, energy, and possibilities flowed freely between dimensions. What should have been chaos instead became a dance of reality, a harmony of existence. Through it all, Lyra could feel herself changing too. The more they worked to guide the integration, the more she understood that she wasn't just observing interdimensional space, she was becoming part of it. Status report, she called out, her voice now carrying harmonics that hadn't existed before. Integration at 60%, Thuron reported, his geometric patterns now incorporating elements from multiple mathematical systems. New stability matrices forming spontaneously. The energy requirements are balancing, Nyx added in wonder, her stellar form now containing constellations that had never existed in any single dimension. The unified reality is becoming self-sustaining. Finally, after what could have been moments or millennia, the quantum harmonizer indicated that the integration was complete. The dimensional void had transformed into something new, not a barrier between realities, but a bridge connecting them all. Well, Lyra said, looking at her hands which now seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, I suppose this means a lot of paperwork. Actually, Thuron replied, his patterns expressing what might have been amusement. With the barriers gone, most of the old regulations are technically invalid. Don't worry, Nyx added with a stellar smile, I'm sure we'll create new ones. Reality still needs some organization after all. As they surveyed the new unified reality, Lyra thought about Rivera, whose desperate attempt to break free of dimensional constraints had inadvertently led to something greater than simple escape. She was probably still filing reports in that pocket dimension, unaware that her actions had changed everything. So Lyra asked her companions, what are our titles now, since optimization specialist seems a bit outdated? Integration facilitators has a nice ring to it, Nyx suggested. As long as we still get to file forms, Thuron added, causing all three of them to laugh, a sound that rippled through multiple dimensions simultaneously. Around them, the new reality continued to stabilize, full of possibilities they had only begun to explore. And somewhere, in what used to be separate dimensions, countless beings were waking up to discover that their universe had become infinitely larger and more interesting. You know, Lyra said, adjusting her now multi-dimensional quantum harmonizer, we should probably write some guidelines for navigating unified reality. Already on it, Thuron and Nyx replied in unison, causing another ripple of interdimensional laughter. Some things, it seemed, never changed, even when everything else did.